Hello all, my name is Aishwarya and I'm from CSE Department of MSRIT. Today I made this video tutorial on what directory services are, what LDAP protocol is, and what is OpenLDAP in general. To follow my tutorial, you would need to have a Mac system and you need to have installed OpenLDAP on it. And for observation purposes, the app called Apache Directory. I will share the links to all of these downloads in the comment section. Let's get started with the tutorial. Before we get started with the tutorial, I'd like to go through a roadmap on what we are going to cover today. I'll be answering questions, all of these questions right here, after which we'll have a brief explanation of OpenLDAP, followed by an example of a directory service, and then we'll go with the installation on a Mac system. So let's get started. First of all, to understand LDAP and OpenLDAP, we need to understand what a directory service in general means. A directory service is like a specialized database which is optimized for reading, browsing, and searching. So, what I'm trying to say is take a telephone directory, for example. It has all of the information of people living in different areas, probably their addresses, including the phone numbers through which we can reach these particular people. That's what a telephone directory does. So within a telephone directory, you can look for the contact, browse, and you can search, you can read. You don't have any complicated transactions or rollback schemes or whatever. And a directory, you would automatically require a directory to have sophisticated filtering capabilities, because you don't want to I can't go to a city called Bangalore and search for a person called John. There are a lot of Johns. I need to enable a lot of filters to identify the correct John that I'm searching for. And the other thing a directory service mainly needs to have is it needs to have a quick response to high volume lookup. What that means is, for a large populated database, you cannot have backend databases like SQL that take a lot of time to retrieve a query. I mean, in a short database that might be really easy, but in some information that is really huge, it is hard to retrieve quickly the information. So, which is why, these are the things that a directory service should have in it. And how a directory service can be provided is the next question. It can be local or it can be global. So there are some local services which have restricted context, like the finger machine on a machine, finger service on a machine, and some other directories are global, like internet. Global services are usually distributed services. The internet domain name system is a distributed directory service, as an example. So now we come to the main question, LDAP. What is this LDAP? So now we understood what a directory service is and we understood the requirement for it. But we have identified the fact that if the data is huge, storing it and retrieving it each time from a backend database would cause a huge overhead. So how will I avoid this? To avoid, earlier they used to implement X.500 DAP to implement directory services. But without going too deep into this X.500 protocol, we can simply say that it was heavyweight and it was extremely hard to deploy the directory services on it, and it would take a lot of time and all of that, which is when they came up with LDAP. The full form of LDAP is Lightweight Directory Protocol. As the name suggests, it is lightweight, it is sufficient and straightforward, very easy to implement as compared to your X500. And because the data is organized in form of trees inside LDAP, it is more of a Unix file system of sorts. And you have very simple set of encoding rules for LDAP, and it runs directly above TCP/IP layer, and all of the data that is within LDAP, it is represented using strings. So those are the few things you should know about LDAP and what LDAP is in general, and what is the sort of information I can store in LDAP directory. So as we have already discussed, it is based on entries like a database itself. An entry is defined as a collection of attributes that has a globally unique distinguished name. So if I have deployed a global service, I obviously have a need to distinguish the any entry that I make into the database or the directory. It has to be distinguished from each other, which is why the stressing on the unique distinguished name part of it. So all the entries that are arranged in a directory are in tree-like structures, and any information can be stored in string format. So I would like to go to a simple example and show you what um, it means. Here, when we look at this diagram, it starts off at the top with C equal to GB or C equal to US. What this particular diagram is illustrating is a tree structure in a directory. Here we've used traditional naming convention. Say that there is a person called Barbara Jensen working in an organization of ABC organization. So within ABC organization, there are a lot of organizational units like your sales and your marketing. So excuse me while we go back. So now there are two places, your Great Britain or US. Let's start at the top of the tree. And the organization has several branches all over the universe, I mean, all over the world. And to distinguish between the branches, the main first ever filter you're adding there is whether it is Great Britain or whether it is US. Within US, I'm going to specify the state, California. Within California, I'm specifying the organization Acme. And within Acme, I'm specifying an organizational unit, whether it's a sales unit or whether it's marketing unit. And within sales unit, there is a person called Barbara Jensen. So in the same level of the tree, the name that I use is a canonical name to distinguish myself from others in the same level. But if I want to distinguish Barbara Jensen in US from Barbara Jensen of Great Britain, then I would have to mention all of the things, all of the following attributes, like Barbara Jensen working in sales department of Acme organization in California of US. So that forms your distinguished name. Another example could be this one, where you have your internet naming tree, where various websites could fall under categories like .net or .com or .de, and within the .com category you have organization, and within organization you have people and servers and things like that. So this is another tree, and you have another example of tree here. So that's how it goes. I hope you understood what the directory structures mean. Now we go, so far we have clearly discussed what all of these LDAP is, what directory structure is, what a directory service does, how's the information stored. We observe the tree structure. Now the next question that comes to mind is, okay, we're storing a lot of important information, or maybe non-important too, but most times the information is very important and personal. So how are you preventing unauthorized access, right? So unauthorized access can be prevented. It is not an issue. The thing about is some of the directory services do not have protection, but we as developers can write protection packages and add it to the protocol. So there are various authentication mechanisms provided. LDAP security model is given, which defines how information can be protected from unauthorized access. And you have a directive called access to, followed by what, followed by the attribute called by. The three things: what needs to be accessed and who can access it, the level of access. All of this can be mentioned inside your open LDAP. So you do have security provided. So going to the next question, how does LDAP work? I'd like to now sum over what all we went through so far and understand how LDAP works in general. Firstly, LDAP is an application protocol used over an IP network to manage and access distributed directory information service. Correct. So the primary purpose of a directory service is to provide a systematic set of records. Usually, all these records are organized in a hierarchical structure. We know that it's similar to a telephone directory that contains a list of subscribers. In order to commence an LDAP session, a client needs to connect to a server known as Directory System Agent, which is set by default to use TCP port 389. Now, after the connection is established, the client and server exchange packets of data. Basic encoding rules are used to transfer information between the server and client. Although the structure of LDAP seems relatively complex, it's fairly simple to understand, which we just went through. The tree structure. It has a set of attributes is contained in an entry. Each attribute accommodates one or more values and has a name. Each entry in the directory is assigned a unique identifier that consists of relative name. So the server is capable of holding a subtree and its children beginning from a particular entry. I'm talking about the structure of LDAP, of course. So now that is how LDAP works. The next question is, how is the information in LDAP even referenced, right? So information is referenced through the DN, which we spoke about, the distinguished name, through which a distinguished name is made by concatenating the name of the entry itself and the names of its ancestor entries. Correct. So that was about that. Now we go to what are the various operations that are possible to be done in LDAP protocol operation. So the various possible operations are search, compare, add, delete, and authentication, and all of that. So to go into detail, um, first one is your LDAP add. So the first one is your LDAP add. Your Open LDAP package comes with shell executable named LDAP add, which is used to add entries to the database while LDAP server is running. The basic syntax has been described here. Add is obviously used to insert a new entry into the directory to serve a database. If the name entered by the user already exists, the server fails to add duplicate entry and instead shows an entry already exists message. The next one is your LDAP delete. LDAP delete is another shell executable for deleting entries. The syntax is clearly shown here. Also, you can have LDAP bind. It's another shell executable to modify data in the directory database, and the syntax is similar to your LDAP add. Later, you go to the search, which is shell accessible interface. It's a C routine and it opens connection to the LDAP server, performs search, follows filtering rules. Example has been given here. This particular example is allowed read access by default to all the people of MSRIT. Whoever has read access in MSRIT, their entries will be returned. So that's about the few operations that LDAP has. Other than these, the other operations include bind. Bind is on connection with the LDAP server. The default authentication state of the session is anonymous. So there are basically two types of LDAP authentication methods. One is a simple authentication method and the other one is an SASL authentication method. So that's about bind. And the other operation is unbind, of course. Unbind is inverse of the bind operation, which aborts any existing operations and terminates the connection, leaving no response in the end. So now we go back to the final question, which is why do we even need LDAP, right? So why should we be using LDAP or OpenLDAP? Most LDAP servers are optimized for read-intensive operations. Thus, one can see an order of magnitude difference when reading data from an LDAP directory versus obtaining the same data from a relational database server optimized for OLTP. Because of this optimization, however, most LDAP directories are not suited for storing data where changes are frequent. But otherwise, this is the main reason LDAP is so favorable is because it is optimized for read intensive operations. So now we go to the installation of OpenLDAP onto your system. Open a terminal window, and within the terminal window, the first thing you would be doing is installing OpenLDAP. For this, you need to say sudo port install OpenLDAP. When you do this, it's going to install OpenLDAP with the Berkeley database as your backend. Since I have already done it, it's saying that it tried to update, or it tried to see if there were broken files, and no broken files were found, so I'm good to go. So once you finish the installation step, navigate to the OpenLDAP folder. Here there are two files that you need to be mainly concerned with. The configuration files called slapd and LDAP. So in general, when you initially download, these two configuration files are stored as slapd.conf.default and ldap.conf.default. What you need to be doing is rename these two as ldap.conf and slapd.conf. To rename a file, you obviously have to use the command called mk. So if I want to rename the slapd.conf default file, I say mk old name, which is slapd.conf.default, and the new name, which is slapd.conf. I have already done this before, so I'm not going to say enter, but this is the step you need to do. Follow this for both the slapd configuration and LDAP configuration. And once you're done with this, the next step that you need to follow is you copy, enter into the db OpenLDAP data file, and copy what is in dbconfig example to dbconfig. So to copy one contents to another, what you do is you say cp db underscore config dot example to db underscore config. As I have already done this, I will not say enter, but you should be doing it. Once you're done with that, you need to open up the LDAP configuration file. So in the LDAP configuration file, you need to set the base for the LDAP tree and also URI for your LDAP server. The changed LDAP configuration file looks like this. Let me show it to you. Sudo nano ldap.conf. I have already made the changes, so just notice that this URI, I have noted it down, ldap:/. This particular IP address is your system's IP address, and it always runs on the port 389. And here you set your base also for LDAP tree. Once you're done with this, go back. The next thing you do is you need to modify slapd file. The few things that require modifications in the slapd file are all the related schema included should be uncommented, and it needs to be there. You need to set the suffix root dn and root password. Suffix needs to be same as what you defined for base in your LDAP configuration file, and root dn is dn of the OpenLDAP root user. So here I'm going to say that cn equal to admin, dc equal to wso2, and dc equal to com, which I had showed you previously in the LDAP configuration file. Now you need to set the root password. Here this is a little tricky. Most people get it wrong. So follow this part carefully. What happens is initially type the command slap passwd. When you do that, it'll ask you for new password, which is whatever you want to say. I'm going to key in something, then it'll ask you to re-enter the password. I will say that too. Now it will generate a SSA key, which I want you to copy and keep it in the clipboard. This we are going to use for later purposes. So once you're done copying that, you need to go in and give this as the password, root password in your um, slap the configuration file. So after you make all of these changes, I will show you how the configuration file looks. Enter the configuration file sudo nano slapd.conf. Here, please make sure that module path and module load lines are uncommented. That's the first thing that is very, I'm sorry, I'll make this full screen. So module path, which is here, and module load, which is here, needs to be uncommented because this is a Berkeley database. Once you're done with that, the other changes I have included, you will, when you go by default, you will mostly not have these NI schema and inter org schema, cosine schema included. So please go ahead and include these, and change the bottom part. Roll down to the bottom where you see the suffix and the root TN and the root password. Here in the root password, I will paste the uh, key that I just copied. So you say Control X, yes, I would like to save it, and enter. So once you're done with that, now you're left with, you can start off your OpenLDAP server. How do you start the server? You say sudo user libexec slapd capital D3. So this is the line you say which starts your server. I'm sorry, the D has to be small d. Do not make mistakes like that. So once you're done with that, you're good to go. I have already added a few entries to my base and things like that. So now I will demonstrate a tool called Apache Directory Studio, through which you can see the existing directory structure. I will share the things or the code on how to add entries to the tree, but here I have added in this particular tree the root DSC. I have not added any entries to it yet, but you can add entries from the terminal and you can see it right here as root DSC. So that's about your LDAP Apache Directory Studio that you can connect and see the structure. Viewing the instance of OpenLDAP would be very easy with that. So what one needs to notice is LDAP is already included by default and installed on every copy of Mac OS X. For Mac operating system servers, it's easier to get LDAP up and running, given that you have a nice handy graphical means of manipulating LDAP in the Open Directory features of Server Admin and Workgroup Manager. So when I say nice handy graphical interface, I mean something like Apache Directory Studio or JExplorer or some other tool. So finally, I would like to conclude the video with a little more in general explanation of LDAP. LDAP, the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, which is an internet protocol that email and other programs use to look up information from a server. It is mostly used by medium to large organizations. If you belong to one that has an LDAP server, you can use it to look up the contact info and the like. Otherwise, if you were just wondering about this acronym, you probably don't need it, but feel free to go ahead and look at the tutorial just to understand some fun concept called LDAP. and it is a bit of internet plumbing. So every email program has a personal address book, but how do you look up an address for someone who's never sent you email? How can an organization keep one centralized, up-to-date phone book that everybody has access to? These questions led companies such as Microsoft, IBM, Lotus, and Netscape to support a standard called LDAP. LDAP-aware client programs can ask LDAP servers to look up entries in a wide variety of ways. So LDAP servers index all the data in their entries, and filters may be used to select just the person or group you want and return just the information you want. For example, I'll just go and tell you the LDAP search translated into plain English. Something like search for all people located in Chicago whose name contains Fred that have an email address. So please return their full name, email, title, and description. When I say this is a simple English sentence, but I can apply these filters and retrieve only those particular columns, that's name, email, title, and description, from the LDAP directory. So LDAP is not exactly limited to just contact information or even information about people. It can be used to look up encryption certificates, pointers to printers, and other services on a network. And it provides like single sign-on where one password for a user is shared between many services. LDAP is appropriate for any kind of directory-like information where fast lookups and less frequent updates are the norm. So, as a protocol, LDAP does not define how programs work on either the client or server side. It defines the language used for client programs to talk to servers and servers to servers too. On the client side, a client may be an email program, a printer browser, or an address book. So, the server may speak only LDAP or have other methods of sending and receiving data, or LDAP may just be an add on method. If you have an email program as opposed to web-based email, it probably supports LDAP. Most LDAP clients can only read from a server. Search abilities of clients, as seen in email programs, vary widely. A few can write or update information, but LDAP does not include security or encryption, so updates usually require additional protection, such as encrypted SSL connection to the LDAP server. So if you have an OS X and access to LDAP server, you can enter your LDAP account into System Preferences, Internet Accounts, at the bottom right pane. So that is right here, System Preferences, and then you go to Internet Accounts. It is right here, and then you can, on the bottom right corner, add another account and then choose LDAP account option. So add another account and LDAP account. There you go, you can add it there. This address, so this lets the address book look up information from your server if you have deployed one. So LDAP also defines permissions set by the administrator to follow only certain people to access the LDAP database. To allow only certain people to access the LDAP database. And optionally, it also keeps certain data private. Schema is a way to describe the format and attributes of data in the server. For example, a schema entered in an LDAP server might define a groovy person entry type, which has attributes of instant message address and coffee roast preference. So the normal attributes of name, email address, etc. would be inherited from one side of standard schemas, which are rooted in X500. So LDAP was designed at University of Michigan to adapt a complete enterprise directory system to modern internet. So the complete enterprise system was X500. X500 is too complex to support on desktops and over the internet. So LDAP was created to provide this service for the rest of us. LDAP servers exist at three levels. There are public servers, large organizational services, servers at universities and corporations, and smaller LDAP servers for work groups. Most public servers from around year 2000 have disappeared, although directory.verisign.com exists for looking up X509 certificates. Well, either way, the idea of publicly listing your email address for the world to see, of course, has been crushed by spam. So, while LDAP didn't bring us the worldwide email address book, it continues to be a popular standard for communicating record-based directory-like data between programs. So, in the end, I'd like to say thank you to my teachers for giving me a chance to explore OpenLDAP in detail, and I hope all of you have understood a little bit of LDAP and OpenLDAP, which is the open source LDAP, and hope that you all would try out based on the tutorial. I will share all of the download links and the few steps that need to be typed into the terminal for you to set up OpenLDAP on your Mac systems as well. Thank you.